Let me first of all say to everyone here, my family, my friends, my colleagues, it's been a great ride. Like a roller coaster, it's been very up and down. A few weeks ago, I wasn't sure how things were going to turn out. First of all, I survived the earthquake. Then I survived the floods of Irene. And then my car was broken into. Then the next week, my wife's car was broken into. The next week, both our cars were broken into. And then following that, my wife accidentally fell in the kitchen and had to have surgery on her hip. But she's here today on crutches, and I think she may get better use out of the Prudential Chair than I will. But I'm glad to have the chair. But you know, gaining respect has always been something that I've tried to achieve. Sometimes it's not always been easy. When I was at the University of Pennsylvania, I graduated and I moved out west, and I told people, I'm from Penn. And they would say, oh, the football school, Penn State. I said, no, I'm from Penn. Oh, okay. Then I moved back east, and I took a job at Penn State where I taught for 16 years, and I would tell my friends out west, hey, I'm teaching at Penn State. They said, oh, Wharton, great school, University of Pennsylvania. I said, no, I'm at Penn State. I said, oh. And then I went to Howard University, and while I was there, I visited Singapore, and actually my wife and I lived there in Singapore and Hong Kong for 4 years. And I would tell my Asian students, I teach at Howard University. And they would say, great, Harvard, great school. I would say, no, it's Howard University. And they would say, oh, I've never heard of that. And then I finally came back east, and I'm at Rutgers now, and I'm still facing the same uphill battle. I tell my friends here, I say, I've taken a job at Rutgers. And the first thing they say is, great campus, New Brunswick, you'll love it. And I says, no, I'm at Newark. And, and I get the same kind of reaction. But it's good to have achieved what we've achieved, and I'm so grateful that my family, friends, colleagues here, my wife of 43 years, my 5 children, my 9 grandchildren, and many, many in the audience, some of whom I've known for over 50 years. I see some of my high school teachers here, some of my high school colleagues here, people that have been very near and dear to me. So indulge me a little bit. I'd like to make this less of a celebration about me and more of a celebration through my slides about family members and colleagues and friends that I've known over the years. And I know I'm going to leave folks out, but I had to go with the slides that I have. And I do wish that at the reception I'll get a chance to meet and greet and speak with everyone. Let me start with my PhD days. When I first entered the PhD program in 1980, my mentor said to me, they said, look, if you want to be a success in this field, you need to be productive. And I thought about that, and I said, you know, I'm going to be the most productive person at the University of Colorado in the PhD program. And when I graduated, I was the most productive PhD student ever. Here I am in the first year of my PhD program. Here I am in the second year of my PhD program. Here I am in the third year of my PhD program, the fourth year of my PhD program, and the 5th year of my PhD program. And finally, they pulled me aside and says, hey, look, you've got to produce some articles. You've got to do some scholarship. I said, oh, that's what you meant by being productive. So I was a little slow out of the gate, but you know, I tried to catch up eventually. So I did eventually move along, and this is members of our family a few years ago before we had the 9 grandchildren. So we've been very productive, and we're continuing to be productive in that capacity. Here I am back during my PhD days, and I was very grateful to actually, after my PhD, to be very productive, because this was in the 80s when they selected scholars to attend something called the Doctoral Consortium. And 25 years later, they always pick the 4 people that supposedly have achieved significant gains and been the most successful. And I was really grateful to be among one of those 4 people. So here we are back in the 80s, and then a few years ago, here we are, the 4 of us that were selected to be the representations of that class of, in the 1980s. But you know, there's a saying that says, because I was an English major at the University of Pennsylvania, it says that if you want to understand a poem, you need to understand the poet. And I really feel that to understand my research, you need to understand the researcher. So I'm going to share with you some of the things that have basically helped me to achieve what I've achieved and where I've gained insight about my research. One of my early articles was this article about reflections of a black middle-class consumer caught between two worlds or getting the best of both. And when you think about that, and you think about my work on discrimination and work on consumer racial profiling, a lot of it goes back to my history. And so when you understand where I've been, you can get a better grasp of where I've ended up. It can go back to many years ago. We had some very turbulent times back in Levittown, where I grew up, about an hour down the Turnpike South and across the bridge. And we had a lot of civil unrest during those days when a black family moved out of the black section of the area and moved into Levittown proper. And this woman, Daisy Myers, was a neighbor of mine, someone I've continued to stay in touch with over the years. And she wrote a book about that experience called Sticks and Stones, The Myers Family in Levittown. But it had a deep impact on me. I'm still in touch with her today, and it's interesting that she's been brought back to Levittown and given the keys of the city. And so we've come a long way since those days. But during those times, there were a lot of things that made impressions on me. These are some photographs out of her book about some of the things that she went through during the days that she broke the color barrier. In fact, she's been often referred to as the Rosa Parks of the North. I also will mention that as a result of that, that's why one of my early articles was on racially exclusive real estate advertising, which really goes back to those particular days. I also think about my early days in the Bristol Township School District, where in 1957 they hired the first black school teacher. And I was fortunate enough to be in that class. And there I am in the second row from the bottom with my bow tie. And that made a deep impression upon me. And that was really the first time that I really thought about being an educator and making an impact on others. The next year, they had an accelerated class. And I was the only African American in that class, and I was fortunate enough to really get a start on trying to think about academic achievement. And one of my good friends, Eileen Hoffman-Shine, she and her husband are here today. We became friends in 6th grade and continue to be friends through high school, have stayed in touch over these 50 years. She helped me get through my Spanish classes, and I'm fortunate to say that Mr. and Mrs. Picarello, my high school teachers, who Mrs. Picarello taught us Spanish, she's here today. But also, it was my running that really helped me. This particular gentleman who's holding the stopwatch had a big influence on me, Ira Bud Grossman. He was my coach. We've continued to stay in touch. He just recently celebrated his 60th wedding anniversary, and we continue to communicate. But it was a bunch of other people during that era. I'm standing, in case you didn't know there, but the person kneeling next to me is a gentleman named Michael Steele, and he broke color barriers. He and his brother, Gary Steele, they were the first African Americans as brothers to go into West Point. And Michael was an outstanding distance runner. In those days, I set a lot of records, but I think Michael beat me as many times as I beat him. But his brother became pretty much the best athlete I think that ever came out of our school. Here's a story about him a few years ago where he was the first black football player at West Point. So these were the type of people that I interacted with and had an opportunity to not only influence them, but for them to influence me. Another person that was influential, another colleague, Carl Crimser, from an immigrant family who came to Levittown. He and his family, his parents moved him there. And there's my coach, Bud Grossman, on the right. But another influential person in my life was Dr. Frank Fergelli, the principal, who continued to mentor me and guide me and help me to move to, as I went on to the University of Pennsylvania. And I was so fortunate that last year I was inducted into the Bristol Township High School Hall of Fame, and Gary Steele and Carl Crimser had already been inducted, so it's good to know that I'm in good company, and also my good friend Eileen Shine is also in that Hall of Fame. Well, let me just tell you a little bit how I got into discrimination research. I'm going to tell you a story. It was back in 1987. We moved to State College, Pennsylvania. I went to the mall, and my children, my 4 boys, we had our daughter with us, but our 4 boys got separated. And so some of the research, if you look at the work that I've done about discrimination, you find that many times minorities will overdress when they go out to shop because they want to be treated with dignity and respect. So we felt we would dress our kids up so that we wouldn't be suspected of shoplifting, and this was a town of only about 1% African Americans. So we put on their best and finest attire. No, that's not, I'm sorry, guys, that's the wrong slide there. This is the best and finest attire that we put on. So we actually took them to the mall, and when we lost them, we finally found them. They had been accused of shoplifting. I asked them, what was it? And they basically said that because they had been with new clothes. And the interesting thing, I asked my colleagues, should I be concerned about that? And almost everyone said, well, no, because they were just doing their job. Well, as a result of that, it got me thinking about things like racial profiling. But what really got me thinking was a few years later, I've been reading the paper, and I read about these boys, almost the same age as my boys, go into Eddie Bauer. They're wearing new clothes. They're suspected of shoplifting. The guards won't let them go. They say, you have to bring your mother back before we will let you go. The mother comes back with the receipt, and everything is okay. And the only difference is the end of that story. Those boys sued Eddie Bauer and won $3 million. And I looked at that story, and I said, that's what I want to study. That's where my research is going. All I got was a letter of apology, and I have a PhD. If I had really been smart, back in 1991, I would have had the Prudential Chair with that suit for $3 million. But now it's good, too. So, but I want to go on and talk about some of my colleagues, Anne Marie Harris and Dr. Henderson, who's now in the faculty here. The three of us have really done a lot of this pioneering work on discrimination. Some of our early articles that have been cited widely, been in a lot of news media. This was one of the landmark articles in the Journal of Public Policy and Marketing. And so these are the things that have really helped us to achieve the things that we've done in this area. And we now have a website where people can go to look at our research. Well, I want to talk about 6 things that, I lived in Singapore, they used to talk about something called the Ethos of Materialism, materialistic possession and aspiration, the 6 C's: cash, car, credit card, condominium, country club, and career. That's what they used to talk about in Singapore. Well, I've modified that, and I talk about my 6 F's: faith, family, friends, fun, fortune, and fame. And I really think that the top ones, faith, family, and friends, are really the things that really drive the other things. And I'd like to just share a little bit about that. I'd like to acknowledge 3 members of my faith, the local congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses who are here this evening, who have attended here to support me in this event. I want to acknowledge my long-term friend for over 50 years, probably my oldest and dearest friend, Mark Lucas, who those who are from Levittown will remember the Lucas Lumber Yard is the landmark there. In fact, Mark's dad gave me my first job, I think at 75 cents an hour, wasn't it, Mark? But my parents, of course, there on the right, my mom and dad, my brother and sisters, my cousin who grew up with us as a sister, my aunt and uncle who really took us in when in my senior year my mother passed away and my father was a widower and we had to deal with a lot of adversity. I also like to thank my family that I married into. Here's my wife's mom and dad. Here they are when they visited us in Singapore. All of her brothers and sisters together. And also one of my dearest friends, her oldest brother, Charles Harrison, who, like Mark, we've been friends for close to 50 years. And, when I was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, I really started getting to be friends with my wife's brother before I got to be friends with my wife. And so I kind of like married one of my best friend's sister. But, in those days, I was in college, and one of my wife's sisters was ironing my shirts. Another one was fixing meals for me. Another one was washing my clothes. And I guess her father said, either you've got to marry into this family or stop coming over for dinner. So we ended up marrying into the family. My father was in the military. My father-in-law was in the military. And I've actually used this in some of my work in my research because my father-in-law was featured in a story when he came back from Vietnam. And we talked about some of the things, both my father and my father-in-law, about the era of the military when it was highly segregated. And some of these things had an influence on me in terms of my research. So, It's been a great ride, not only for me, but also for my children. So I'm going to very quickly run through some of my slides on my children. Indulge me while I brag a little bit. Not only my boys, but also my daughter. And I always tell people, when I graduated from the University of Colorado, I had 2 dissertations. I had the one that's published, but after my daughter was born, if you know the names of my children, Deneen, Derek, Daniel, Dante. So when we were in the hospital, my wife said, look, you name our daughter. Well, I named her the first thing that came to my mind, dissertation. Well, I learned a couple of things. One, you can change the name of children before they leave the hospital. And 2, women who just had babies have no sense of humor. But I do know that the apple has not fallen too far from the tree. In our family of the 5 kids, 2 are educators, teachers, and 2 are in financial business. My second oldest son is a teacher, an elementary school teacher, went to a special program where he's been a role model. They were called the Greencastle Men, were featured in a story about the role of having male teachers in the elementary school. Here he is, the bearded one, with his class. My daughter is a teacher in Northern Virginia. Here she is with some of her students. My oldest son has his own business, operates a hedge fund. He's been featured in various magazines, including Black Enterprise. Last year, he was named one of the top 40 under 40 business people by the Philadelphia Business Journal. But my 2 youngest also have been in business, and they grew up together. There's Daniel and Dante, and they've always been a kind of a team. Here they are. Oh, oops, sorry about that. Sorry about that one too. Here they are. There we go. Those 2 also operate businesses and I'm very proud actually of all my sons. But before my youngest son went into business, he was an airline pilot. He flew for United. And I used to kid him. I said when he was young, I elevated him to the best son because we got to fly for free. But then when he started his own business, I had to relegate him back to his rightful place and at the end of the line. But I think he looked too young. I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to get on a plane with him. That looking like that looks like a teenager. Well, my running, the fun part, I had a lot of opportunity to run when I was at the University of Pennsylvania. Set a lot of marks. I've stayed in touch with a lot of these guys. Here we are a few years ago when we reunited to honor one of our legendary coaches at Penn, Jim Tuppeny, who had passed away. But perhaps my closest friend over the years has been Joe DeMeo, and he and I teamed up to set some records while we were at the University of Pennsylvania. That's Joe on the right, and Joe is here today. He's a dentist here in the area, and I'm grateful that he and his wife Inga have joined us for this celebration. And there we are a few years ago at the Penn Relays, and his son next to him and my oldest son next to his son Joe. Boston Marathon, I was telling the CEO of Prudential how much Prudential means to me, because when I ran the marathon, when you would come up to the top of Heartbreak Hill, the Prudential Center was what you would look for. If you could just get to the Prudential, you had 4 miles to go, but you could see that building if you could just get to the Prudential. And so I'm glad today that I've finally gotten back to the Prudential. And I've had an opportunity to work with the Prudential Center. They had a study that they did on the African American financial experience. They invited me in to share my insight about that. I was delighted to do that. When I was in Singapore, they did an article on me, on my running exploits, and also the work that I had done on obesity, this book that we published, Food Marketing to Children and Youth. But one of my sons was not very impressed with as I said, I have a hard time getting respect even from my kids sometimes. So he sent the picture back to me and said, the article should have been about obesity and old men in advertising. Look at the beer gut. Now I know where mine comes from. Well, you never do battle with somebody who has access to Photoshop. So I wrote him back and said, well, that's an old picture. Your mom and I have been really working out, and here's what I look like now. And here's what your mom looks like now. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through some of these other slides very quickly. These are all former students of mine. This was when I got an award from the Bill Powers, the University of Texas president, on my work on diversity. Here are some of our students at the University of Texas, the PhD students. One of my Nigerian students, when her parents couldn't make it to the wedding and she got married, she asked me and my wife to stand in. And there's an old saying in Singapore that once your teacher, always your parent. And I really feel that about all my students. Many of my students, and Uwe Myers, who was my undergrad student at Howard, then came to Texas, got her PhD, and she's here in the audience too. So I'm so grateful for all these folks who've shown up for this. Some of my many other students I'm just going to run through because of the interest of time. Even from Singapore, this is my student from Singapore who came to live with us for 2 weeks while she collected her data. And then my students here at Rutgers from the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. We were celebrating Dr. Ogilvy's promotion to full professor, and some of the faculty and the students got together. And I always like to dress up for the occasion. Here are some opportunities with some of my students where I wear my Indian outfit, when I'm in Jamaica, when I'm at a conference in Dubai, you know, when I'm wearing my Namadi cap from Iran. And also, when I was in Singapore, the most frequent question I got asked was, in Singapore, what part of India are you from? And I say, I'm not from South India, I'm from South Philly, you know. So and somebody I left out, after our kids were all gone, we added another member of the family, Topaz. And here she is wondering, I don't believe they left me and didn't take me to the investiture ceremony. But she's been a part of our family and just a delight to have. And I'm very delighted to now be the director or the chairman of the Board of Trustees for the American Marketing Foundation. And in that role, the foundation has named an award after me called the Williams Quall Spratlin Award. And I've been able to team up with two of my good colleagues in providing funding for this award that honors those who have tried to follow in my footsteps of mentoring undergrad students. Here we are with our wives when the award was announced. The interesting thing, among the three of us as scholars, there's 105 years of teaching and 136 years of marriage, and so I was very proud of that. So, it's been a great ride, just like we were 43 years ago, my wife and I. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say it's not over with yet. We're ready to ride again. Thank you, and it's been fun talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Williams, for those remarkably interesting and entertaining and self-effacing and enormously enjoyable remarks. And now, if I may ask you to come up and stand with me, I have the pleasure of presenting to you this plaque commemorating your chair and today's event. Let me read it to you. It says, the Board of Governors and the President of Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, proudly designate Dr. Jerome D. Williams as the first holder of the Prudential Chair in Business. With a deep commitment to both entrepreneurship and social justice in the marketplace, Dr. Jerome D. Williams has brought years of insightful scholarship and personal engagement to his roles as a Rutgers professor and research director of the University Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. His penetrating research examines consumer racial profiling and marketplace discrimination, online privacy concerns for consumers, and the impact of food marketing on childhood obesity. His award-winning teaching and mentorship style, honed at prestigious universities in the United States and abroad, now engages Rutgers Business School students in his courses on multicultural markets and urban enterprise development. He also shares his vast knowledge through books, papers, conference presentations, and events, such as the first ever Entrepreneurship Summit hosted in June 2011 by Rutgers and the Obama administration. In recognition of his achievements, the Rutgers Board of Governors and the University President present this certificate of distinction, appointing Dr. Williams as the first occupant of the Prudential Chair in Business at Rutgers Business School, Newark and New Brunswick. Let the designation of Dr. Williams as the holder of this distinguished chair stand as a tribute to his commitment to the highest purposes of academic life and service to humanity, Dr. Jerome D. Williams.